What if the deadliest assassins in the known world were also its most devoted priests? What if the price of a killing was never gold, but a story, a memory, a single whispered truth traded in a temple with no name carved above its door? In a city built on the graves of escaped slaves, behind two doors, one black, one white, stands a temple unlike any other in the world. Inside, the faces of the dead hang on the walls like trophies, like relics, like a warning. Those who serve there do not simply take lives. They believe with total conviction that they are giving something back: mercy, release, an ending, in service of a God so vast that every death god in every religion of the known world is merely one of its faces. They are the Faceless Men. And for thousands of years, they have operated so quietly, so precisely, that most of what we think we know about them is really just what they have allowed us to know. This is a story about identity, mercy, and the price of becoming no one. And by the end, you may not be entirely sure where the history ends and the mystery begins. That uncertainty, as we will see, is not a flaw in the record. For this order, it may be the entire point.
Far across the narrow sea, hidden in a lagoon behind 100 small islands, sits Braavos, the youngest and in some ways the strangest of the 9 free cities. It was founded in secrecy by escaped slaves fleeing the Valyrian freehold, and that founding story matters more than it might first appear, because the order at the center of this documentary was born from the exact same wound. Somewhere in the city's maze of canals stands a temple with 2 doors, one carved of weirwood, painted black, the other of pale stone, white as bone. This is the House of Black and White, and it is the only temple in Braavos with no address, because everyone who needs to find it, finds it. Inside serve the Faceless Men, a religious order and simultaneously the most feared guild of assassins in the known world. Both descriptions are accurate. Neither is complete.
What follows is an attempt to lay out, as carefully as the sources allow, who they are, where they came from, what they believe, how they operate, and, just as importantly, how much about them still remains genuinely unknown. Because unlike most institutions we cover in documentaries like this one, the Faceless Men have not left behind a trail of records for historians to sift through. They have left behind faces. And faces, as we will discover, can lie. Before we begin, a word on method. Everything you are about to hear has been checked against the written sources: the novels, the in-world histories, the appendices, the author's own clarifications where they exist. When the evidence is solid, we will say so. When it is not, we will say that too. This documentary is not interested in filling silence with invention. It is interested in mapping exactly where the silence begins.
To understand the Faceless Men, we have to go back before Braavos existed at all, back to Valyria, at the height of its power, when the freehold ruled through dragons, fire, and an economy built almost entirely on slavery. This is confirmed canon. Valyria's wealth came out of the ground. Beneath the volcanic range known as the 14 Flames lay some of the richest mines in the world, veins of gold, of silver, and above all, the black glass the Valyrians prized, dragon glass, and the volcanic ore that fed their forges. Working those mines was miserable, lethal labor, and the freehold filled its tunnels with slaves drawn from every corner of its growing empire. Different nations, different tongues, different gods, thrown together underground with nothing in common except suffering. It is worth dwelling on just how vast and how brutal this system was. Valyria did not conquer through diplomacy. It expanded across Essos over centuries, absorbing older civilizations, the Rhoynar, the Giscari, dozens of smaller peoples, and funneling their captured populations into its slave economy. A miner beneath the 14 Flames might have been Giscari, Andal, Rhoynish, or from a nation whose name has since vanished from the historical record entirely. The mines did not discriminate by origin. They only discriminated by how long a body could last before it broke. There is strong evidence, drawn from the traditions the Faceless Men themselves maintain, that among those slaves, according to the order's own account of its founding, was a nameless man who worked the mines and watched his fellow slaves die by inches, worked to death, starved, broken by rockfalls, or simply extinguished by masters who valued the ore more than the miner. This man came to believe something radical for his time and place, that death itself, freely given rather than cruelly inflicted, could be an act of mercy, not a punishment, not a tool of control, a gift. The story, as the Faceless Men tell it, is that this slave began granting that gift quietly to those who begged for release from suffering they could not otherwise escape, and eventually to the masters who inflicted it when the god he had come to recognize called for their deaths too. From that single, desperate act of compassion inside a mining pit, the order traces its entire theology. As a matter of historical interpretation, it is worth pausing on what this origin story is actually doing. It is not really a history in the way we would normally define one, a chain of verifiable events. It is closer to scripture, an origin myth that justifies everything that came after it. Whether the first Faceless Man was a single historical person or a composite legend built up over generations of oral tradition is not something the text resolves. What matters for our purposes is that the order's entire self-understanding begins with slavery, suffering, and the idea that killing and kindness are not always opposites. Notice, too, what this myth conveniently accomplishes. It gives an order of professional killers a founding act that is entirely sympathetic. Not conquest, not ambition, but mercy offered to the powerless by one of their own. Whether later generations of the order have lived up to that founding ideal or merely invoked it to dignify a very different kind of business is a question the history itself leaves open, and one we will return to. Confirmed canon also tells us that this same wound, Valyrian slavery, is also, separately, what produced Braavos itself. Long before the Doom, escaped slaves of many origins fled the freehold and its slaving fleets, hid in the secrecy of a fog-shrouded lagoon, and built a city explicitly founded on the rejection of bondage. Slavery has never been legal in Braavos. It is, arguably, the single founding principle of the entire city. The escape itself is remembered in Braavosi tradition as a desperate, secretive undertaking. Refugees of dozens of origins, slipping past Valyrian patrols, guided into a hidden lagoon protected by fog and shallow, treacherous waters that larger warships could not easily navigate. Over generations, that scattered population of former slaves built canals, raised the colossal bronze Titan to guard their harbor, and forged a single Braavosi identity out of what had been, a generation earlier, dozens of separate captive peoples with nothing in common but their chains. It is not a coincidence that the order which began underground among Valyria's slaves eventually found its permanent home in the one city on the map built by former slaves who never wanted to see a master's whip again. The House of Black and White did not choose Braavos at random. In a very real sense, they belong to the same story. A city and an order, both born from the same fire, both defined by what they refuse to become again. Through historical interpretation, this shared origin also explains something about the order's peculiar legal and social standing within Braavos itself. Nowhere else in the known world could an organization built around voluntary death and contracted killing operate this openly, this close to the seat of government, without being hunted down by the authorities. In Braavos, the House of Black and White is simply part of the city's fabric, tolerated, even respected, because its founding story echoes the city's own. At the center of the Faceless Men's theology is a singular, audacious idea. Every god of death in every religion of the known world is not a separate deity at all. Confirmed canon tells us that they are all masks, faces, worn by one true god, whom the order simply calls the many-faced god, or sometimes he of many faces. To the Faceless Men, the stranger of the faith of the seven, the drowned god's watery embrace of the dead, the Lord of Light's fires that consume the wicked, the black goat of Karth,
the pale child of the great grass sea, even the anonymous god the Ironborn fear when they say what is dead may never die. All of these are, in their theology, simply local names for the same universal truth, that death comes for everyone, and that death is not something to fear, but something to accept, and in the right circumstances, something to give.
As a matter of historical interpretation, this is, in effect, a kind of theological universalism layered directly on top of a professional guild of killers, and that combination is what makes the order so unsettling to outsiders. Most religions in the known world personify death as one force among many: judgment, punishment, an ending to be resisted. The Faceless Men have inverted that. To them, death is the only truly universal, truly merciful force in existence, because it comes for the tyrant and the slave, the dragon and the peasant, without favoritism. Every other god plays favorites. Death does not. Let us look at how this idea maps onto the religions it claims to encompass, one at a time. The faith of the Seven worships 7 aspects of a single deity: the father, the mother, the warrior, the maiden, the smith, the crone, and the stranger. The stranger represents death, the unknown, and the other, deliberately depicted without clear gender or form, an outsider, even among its own pantheon. To the Faceless Men, the stranger is not a separate face of the 7 at all. It is simply their own god, glimpsed by septons who never realized what they were actually looking at. The old gods of the first men and the children of the forest have no single death deity, no stranger, no drowned god, no lord of light. Death in this faith is bound up with the weirwoods themselves, and with practices like the greenseer's preservation of memory within the trees. This is the hardest fit for the many-faced gods framework, and the text never has a faceless man directly address it. If pressed, the order's logic would presumably locate its gods somewhere within that same reverence for death and memory, but this specific comparison remains honestly underexplored by the source material, and any confident claim about how the order squares its theology with the old gods would be speculation dressed as analysis. R'hllor, the Lord of Light, stands almost as the philosophical opposite of the many-faced god, a deity of fire, resurrection, and eternal struggle against an equally real god of darkness and death, the Great Other. Where the Faceless Men see death as mercy, R'hllor's faith frames death as something to be fought, delayed, even reversed through resurrection. And yet, within the many-faced god's own theology, that opposition does not disqualify R'hllor. It simply means the Great Other, the death aspect the Red Priests fear, is just one more face among many. The Faceless Men would say the Red Priests worship a god of life and simply have not yet been introduced to death's true kindness. The drowned god, worshipped by the Ironborn, offers perhaps the closest philosophical cousin to the many-faced god outside the House of Black and White itself. What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger, treats death as a doorway rather than an ending, not entirely unlike the Order's own framing of death as release rather than annihilation, though the Ironborn version is bound up with saltwater baptism, drowning rituals, and violent seaborne raiding in a way the Faceless Men's quiet, poison and patience methodology never resembles. Confirmed canon shows us that because of this unifying belief, the Faceless Men do not proselytize and do not condemn other faiths. A worshipper of the Seven, a follower of R'hllor, or a devotee of the old gods can walk into the House of Black and White and drink from the pool at its center, a poisoned pool available to anyone who sincerely wishes to die, and the priests will not stop them, judge them, or try to convert them first. Every religion's death god is welcome at their altar, because in their theology, every religion's death god is already there. This single belief is what allows the Order to justify killing across every culture, on behalf of every faith, without seeing any contradiction. They are not killing for the Seven or for R'hllor. They are killing, in their own understanding, for the one God that every religion already secretly worships, whether it knows it or not. Confirmed canon tells us that the temple itself is deliberately unremarkable from the outside. Squat, plain, and easy to miss if you do not already know where to look. Its defining feature is its twin doors, one carved of black weirwood,
one of pale white stone. Both lead to the same building, but they represent the temple's core visual language, the balance of light and dark, life and death, face and no face, repeated throughout its architecture. Inside, the temple is dominated by a great domed hall lit by candles, with a black and white marble floor and a still, dark pool at its center, fed by an underground spring, from which those seeking a merciful death may drink. Statues of death gods from across the known world's religions line the walls. This is, quite literally, a shrine to every god of death simultaneously, a physical expression of the many faces one god theology we just discussed. According to confirmed canon, below the main temple lies its most infamous chamber, the Hall of Faces. Here, the skinned and specially preserved faces of the dead, some belonging to former faceless men, others taken from those the Order has killed or who donated their faces upon death, hang in rows, available to be worn by trained priests as disguises. It is simultaneously an archive, a reliquary, a wardrobe, and to any outsider who stumbles upon it, one of the most disturbing sights in the known world. There is strong evidence that life inside the temple is built around ritual, service, and near total self-erasure. Acolytes perform menial labor, cleaning the temple, tending the dead, preparing bodies, and assisting in the temple's kitchens. A recurring figure Arya encounters is an old cook, Uma, whose presence underscores just how domestic and mundane much of daily life inside the temple actually is. Cooking, cleaning, waiting, set against the far more theatrical business of poison and disguise happening in the same building. Priests of the Order are referred to by descriptive titles rather than by any name of their own. The kindly man, the waif, reinforcing at every level, even in casual address, the Order's core demand that identity be surrendered. These priests oversee training, administer poisons brewed on site in a chamber Arya is shown and warned about extensively, and act as the temple's public face for those who come seeking a merciful death, or through more secretive channels, contracting a killing. Through historical interpretation, what is notable is how little violence actually happens inside the temple walls, at least as far as the books show us. The House of Black and White functions, first and foremost, as a place people go to die willingly. The poisoned pool exists for the suffering and the hopeless, not for political targets. Visitors are shown treating the pool with a kind of solemn respect rather than fear. It is depicted less as an execution chamber and more as an infirmary for those beyond other help. The assassination business, the guild's true reputation in the wider world, operates almost entirely outside those walls, contracted and carried out elsewhere. The temple's public identity, a refuge for the dying, and its secret identity, a school for killers, coexist deliberately under the same roof. It is pure speculation how faces are actually preserved and prepared for the hall. What process turns a dead man's skin into something that can later be worn, seemingly with none of the decay one would expect, is never described. This is squarely unconfirmed territory, and any documentary claiming to know the specific method would be inventing detail the source material simply does not provide. Confirmed canon tells us that recruitment into the Faceless Men is not advertised, not requested, and, as far as the text shows us, not something a person can simply apply for. Those who are accepted tend to be found, children or young people who have already demonstrated an unusual resilience, discipline, or, in some cases, a willingness to kill under extraordinary circumstances. The Order's most famous initiate, Arya Stark, was brought to their attention because a faceless man named Jaqen H'ghar owed her a debt, 3 deaths promised in payment for saving his life, and was struck by what he saw in a traumatized child capable of naming names without flinching. Strong evidence suggests that training begins with erasure, not violence. New acolytes give up their names, their possessions, and their pasts. They are assigned menial, repetitive labor, cleaning, carrying, serving, tending to the bodies of the dead and dying who come to drink from the temple pool. This is not incidental busy work, it is foundational. The Order's entire philosophy holds that a person cannot become no one, cannot fully let go of ego, identity, and personal desire, without first learning total obedience in the smallest, least glamorous tasks. Confirmed canon, as depicted through Arya Stark's specific experience, which is the clearest window the books give us into their training methods, shows that over the course of her time in the House of Black and White, Arya is taught skills far beyond swordplay. How to fall convincingly and take a blow without flinching. How to move unseen through crowded streets. How to hold utterly still and observe a single person for days, memorizing their habits, their walk, their voice, until she could convincingly imitate them. How to lie fluently and consistently under pressure. How to recognize and resist poisons by ingesting them in controlled, non-lethal doses. And throughout all of it, how to suppress her own identity, her own grief, her own list of names, her own desire for revenge. Because the Order insists that a true faceless man kills without personal motive. A significant portion of this training takes place away from the temple itself. Arya is sent to work at Ragman's Harbor, adopting a working alias among the city's dockside population, selling oysters and clams and cockles while secretly observing a target for the Order. A slow, patient exercise in blending into an ordinary life while quietly gathering the kind of granular, everyday intelligence an assassin needs. This period is as much about testing patience and discipline as it is about testing any particular skill. A second, harsher phase of her training involves a period of enforced blindness. Arya is deliberately struck blind by the Order as consequence and as further trial, and made to navigate the temple and eventually the city without sight, developing heightened awareness of sound, scent, and touch as compensation before her sight is eventually restored. During this period, she is also trained in staged, ritualized combat with a fellow acolyte referred to as the Waif, using a wooden staff, an exercise repeated and intensified over time as a test of reflexes, patience, and the ability to endure pain and defeat without losing composure. From a perspective of historical interpretation, this is arguably the Order's most radical demand, and also its most difficult to enforce. The entire training process is designed to strip away personal vendetta, because a killer who kills for their own reasons is, in the Order's own logic, no longer serving the many-faced god, but serving themselves. Arya's ongoing struggle throughout her training is precisely this. She cannot fully let go of Arya Stark, cannot fully release her list, and the text repeatedly frames this as a genuine failure by the Order's own standards, not merely a plot obstacle. Her story is less a triumphant coming of age than a case study in how difficult, maybe how psychologically costly, total self-erasure actually is. Confirmed canon shows that this failure comes to a head when Arya, sent by the Order to carry out a sanctioned killing, instead uses the skills and a disguise obtained through her training to kill someone from her own personal list, the knight Sir Meryn Trant, rather than the Order's intended target. This is treated within the Order's own internal logic as a serious transgression, killing for herself under the cover of the Order's methods, rather than killing as an impersonal instrument of the many-faced god. It remains a matter of speculation how many acolytes complete this training and become full faceless men, versus how many wash out, remain in menial service permanently, or are, as some readers have theorized, quietly eliminated for failing to let go of their old identities, is never stated outright. The text gives us exactly one recruit's partial, incomplete journey. It offers almost nothing about anyone else's. There is strong evidence that the Faceless Men are, by wide reputation across the known world, the single most skilled and most expensive assassins alive, a reputation built less on frequency of visible killings and more on their near-total success rate and the near-total absence of evidence when they do act. Deaths attributed to them are frequently made to look natural, a sudden illness, a fall, a fever that claims a healthy man overnight. The horror of the Faceless Men, for those who fear them, is not a blade in the dark. It is a death nobody can prove was murder at all. Confirmed canon tells us that their price is described as extraordinarily high. Contracts are said to cost a fortune, restricting their services in practice to the very wealthy, the very powerful, or those willing to bankrupt themselves for a single killing. This is not incidental. Scarcity and expense are part of what keeps the Order's activity rare enough to remain mysterious rather than commonplace. Strong evidence, drawn from the Order's own stated rules, as conveyed through Jaqen H'ghar's interactions with Arya, indicates that the Faceless Men appear to operate under a specific ethical code, distinct from simple hired murder. A name must be earned or given properly. Payment is described not only in coin, but sometimes in the currency the Order values above all else, a life owed in exchange for a life taken, as when Jaqen H'ghar considers himself bound to grant Arya 3 deaths after she frees him from a burning cage at Harrenhal. Killing outside of a proper contract, or for personal reasons rather than the gods' purposes, is treated within the Order as a serious violation, as Arya's own later punishment demonstrates. Confirmed canon repeatedly shows that poison is a primary tool of the Order, brewed, tested, and administered with expert precision, capable of mimicking natural illness or producing swift, untraceable deaths. A dedicated chamber within the House of Black and White is devoted specifically to this work, and Arya is explicitly warned of its dangers during her training, underscoring how central poisoncraft is to the Order's identity, not merely one tool among many. Beyond poison, the Order relies heavily on disguise, patience, and information, extended observation of a target, sometimes over weeks, to understand their routines well enough to either strike undetected or to convincingly become someone close enough to them to strike at all. Arya's own extended posting at Ragman's Harbor is a direct example of this method in practice. Weeks of ordinary, unremarkable presence in a target's daily environment, building the kind of intimate knowledge that makes a killing possible without ever raising suspicion. As a matter of historical interpretation, what separates the Faceless Men from an ordinary guild of hired killers, in how the text presents them, is the marriage of ritual and craft. Where other assassins in the story, the cutthroats and hired knives of King's Landing for instance, are depicted as efficient but crude, the Faceless Men are depicted as something closer to master artisans, treating each killing as a kind of sacred performance requiring total preparation. Whether that self-image is entirely accurate, or partly the Order's own carefully cultivated mythology, is something the text leaves for the audience to weigh. It is pure speculation, though fans have long debated whether specific, unexplained deaths across the wider story, a sudden fever, a fatal fall, an inconveniently timed illness among the powerful, might be the Order's quiet work. These theories are often entertaining and sometimes textually plausible, but it is important to be precise here. Unless a source explicitly attributes a death to the Faceless Men, any such claim belongs in the speculation category, not the historical record, however tempting the pattern may look. According to confirmed canon, the Order's signature, and the source of their name, is the ability to change faces, adopting the literal, physical appearance of another person so convincingly that even those closest to the impersonated individual are fooled. This is depicted on the page multiple times. Jaqen H'ghar transforms his own face and voice in front of Arya without any visible mechanism. Arya herself, under training, learns to wear the preserved faces from the Hall of Faces, along with corresponding changes to her voice, walk, and even scent, to become other people entirely, including, in one instance, appearing to become another named character convincingly enough to fool people who knew that character well. From a perspective of historical interpretation, the central unresolved question is how exactly this works, as it is never explained by the text. Several possibilities exist, none confirmed. First, this may be literal high-level magic. The faces in the Hall of Faces are treated in-world as something closer to relics than costumes, preserved through processes never described, and worn in a way that seems to alter more than surface appearance, since voices and mannerisms shift too. Second, it may be a combination of exceptional mundane skill, genuinely masterful disguise, vocal mimicry, and psychological acting, layered with the belief, both by the wearer and by witnesses, that magic is involved, which itself could account for some of the effect through misdirection and reputation alone. Third, and this is squarely in speculative territory, some readers and theorists have proposed a connection between the Faceless Men's face magic and other transformative or skin-changing magic present elsewhere in the setting, such as warging or glamours referenced in other contexts. The text itself never draws this connection explicitly, and no official source confirms it. It remains an open theory, not an established fact.
Confirmed canon also reveals the limits. What is clear is that this ability is not unlimited or effortless. It requires training, preparation, and, based on Arya's early clumsy attempts, real skill that not everyone possesses equally. It is also explicitly tied to identity in a deeper sense within the Order's philosophy. To wear a face is not merely to look like someone, but to temporarily become no one, to erase the self wearing the mask, which is why the Order's ultimate goal for its members is framed not as mastering many faces, but as achieving no face, no name, no identity at all. Through historical interpretation, this is arguably the thematic key to the entire Order. The faces are not simply tools of the trade. They are the physical expression of the Order's core philosophical demand, the erasure of the individual self in service of something larger, made literal and visible in a way almost no other institution in the story manages. A knight can put down his sword. A king can lose his crown. But a faceless man's entire vocation is the act of putting down his own face, repeatedly, deliberately, until there is nothing underneath left to remove. Confirmed canon tells us that very little is directly, explicitly attributed to the Faceless Men in the wider political history of the known world. This is in itself telling, either because their true influence is minimal, or because their entire operating model depends on leaving no fingerprints, which would make confirmed historical credit for their work almost a contradiction in terms. There is strong evidence that a small number of specific deaths across the setting's history and current storyline are strongly suspected by characters within the story or heavily implied by circumstances to be the work of the Order, though rarely stated as certain fact even in-universe. Sudden, convenient deaths of politically inconvenient figures, especially in Free Cities politics and in the war-torn succession crisis playing out across Westeros during the main story, are the kind of events fans and in-world characters alike frequently attribute to the Faceless Men, precisely because an untraceable, natural-seeming death is their signature.
It remains speculative whether the Faceless Men played any role in the doom of Valyria, the cataclysmic volcanic destruction that ended the Valyrian freehold in a single day. This is a popular fan theory built on the thematic resonance of the Order's origins in Valyrian slavery and the sheer scale of the catastrophe. It is worth stating unambiguously, there is no textual evidence for this. The doom is presented in every available source as a natural, if magically inflected and prophetically foreshadowed, catastrophe, not an act of sabotage. This theory belongs entirely in the speculation category, interesting as a thematic parallel, unsupported as history. There is strong evidence, however, of the Order's general reputation among the rich and powerful of the known world as a service available to those who can pay. Kings, magisters, sea lords, and merchant princes are all described, in general terms, as potential clients, and characters across the story treat the Faceless Men's existence and lethal reputation as common, feared knowledge, even if specific hits are rarely confirmed. Braavos itself is governed by an elected Sea Lord, and shaped heavily by powerful institutions like the Iron Bank, and the Order's proximity to that world of high finance and high politics is part of what feeds its reputation for being available, at a price, to whoever can afford it. As a matter of historical interpretation, the overall picture that emerges is of an Order whose actual historical footprint is almost certainly smaller than its mythic reputation, and that gap between reputation and confirmed action may be entirely intentional. Fear of an assassin you cannot see or prove is, in some ways, more useful to the Order than fame for killings you can. A guild that needed to advertise its confirmed kills to stay in business would not have survived thousands of years. A guild whose reputation grows in the space where proof should be, that is a business model built to last.
According to confirmed canon, Arya Stark's path to the House of Black and White begins in violence and grief, not ambition. Having survived the destruction of her family and the horrors of the War of the Five Kings, she carries a list of names,
people she intends to see dead, long before she ever crosses paths with the Order. Jaqen H'ghar, a captured faceless man she frees and inadvertently grants 3 killings worth of debt, is her first real introduction to what the Order can do. And it is this debt, along with a coin he gives her, that eventually leads her to Braavos and the temple itself. Strong evidence suggests that what makes Arya's acceptance into the Order notable is precisely how poor a fit she is for its central demand. She is accepted not because she has already let go of her identity, grief, or desire for vengeance, but seemingly because she shows raw aptitude, resilience, capacity for violence, discipline under Syrio Forel's earlier training, and a willingness to do what the Order asks. Her entire arc within the temple is a slow, uneven, often failed attempt to actually become what they are asking of her. Confirmed canon depicts her internal conflict directly and repeatedly. She recites her list privately, even while training to abandon personal vendetta. She is explicitly punished, struck blind for a time by the Order, after using her assassination skills in a manner the Order judged improper. She is sent to work the docks of Ragman's harbor under an assumed identity as a test of patience and discipline. And she is repeatedly matched in staged combat against a fellow acolyte, the Waif, whose rivalry with Arya runs through much of her training. Ultimately, after being formally offered the chance to fully become no one, Arya instead uses her training's disguise techniques to kill a man from her own personal list, Sir Meryn Trant, rather than a target sanctioned by the Order, and subsequently chooses to reclaim her own name and identity, leaving the Order's formal service, though not entirely its skills, behind her. As a matter of historical interpretation, Arya's story functions, within the wider narrative, as the reader's only sustained, ground-level account of the Order's methods and philosophy. And it is worth remembering that it is a story of incomplete assimilation, not successful transformation. Everything this documentary has described about training, discipline, and the erasure of self comes to us filtered through a student who, by the Order's own standards, ultimately fails to complete the lesson. That does not make her account unreliable, but it does mean we are seeing the Faceless Men through the eyes of someone who, in the end, chose to remain herself. From a perspective of historical interpretation, it is also worth noting what her arc implies about the Order's own tolerance for failure. Rather than eliminating Arya for her transgression, the outcome many readers might expect from an Order this ruthless, she is punished, tested further, and ultimately permitted to leave. Whether that reflects genuine mercy consistent with the Order's stated theology, practical calculation about the risks of moving against a Stark, or simply the limits of what the story chooses to show us, is not something the text settles definitively. Through historical interpretation, if we strip away the poison vials and the peeled-off faces, the Faceless Men are, at their core, an extended meditation on a handful of ideas that run through the entire story around them. Identity, death, justice, mercy, free will, duty, sacrifice, and the cost of belonging to something larger than yourself. When we look at identity, the Order's central demand, that a person surrender their name, their history, their wants, to become no one, sits in direct tension with one of the story's broader preoccupations, the importance of names, houses, and inherited identity in Westerosi society. The Faceless Men represent, in a sense, the total inversion of that value system. Where a Stark or a Lannister is defined by their name, a Faceless Man is defined by the absence of one. Even the Order's honorific titles, the Kindly Man, the Waif, are descriptions, not names, a small daily reminder that the person underneath is meant to no longer matter. When we consider death and mercy, the Order's insistence that death, freely given, can be an act of compassion rather than cruelty is genuinely challenging within the story's moral framework, and the text does not resolve it neatly. The poison pool exists, unambiguously, as a service to the suffering and the hopeless, a form of assisted, painless death offered without judgment. At the same time, that same philosophical framework is used to justify professional killing for payment, and the story never fully lets the Order off the hook for that contradiction. Mercy and murder share the same door, quite literally, given the temple's two-door architecture. In terms of justice and revenge, Arya's arc dramatizes this tension most directly. The Order insists that killing done for personal reasons, for revenge, for a list, is a corruption of their purpose. Only killing sanctioned by the god, through proper contract, counts as a true gift. Arya's repeated inability to fully separate her own desire for justice from the Order's demand for impersonal service is one of the story's clearest illustrations of how difficult that distinction actually is to maintain, even for someone being trained by experts in it. Is a death still a gift if the person giving it is secretly settling a personal score underneath the ritual language? The Order says no. The story lets us watch a character fail that exact test. Looking at free will and duty, total submission to the Order, surrendering your name, your face, your past, is presented as a kind of freedom by its practitioners. Freedom from grief, from ego, from personal suffering. The story is considerably more ambivalent about whether that is actually true, or whether it is simply another kind of servitude, dressed in religious language. Arya's ultimate choice, to walk away, keeping her skills but reclaiming her name, can be read as the story's own quiet answer to that question, though notably, it is an answer the text lets the audience arrive at, rather than states outright. On the subject of sacrifice, every stage of training we have described, the surrendered name, the enforced blindness, the menial years of scrubbing floors and cooking meals, the willingness to be struck down again and again in practice combat, is a form of sacrifice demanded before a single kill is ever sanctioned. The Order asks its members to give up the self long before it ever asks them to take a life. Whatever else can be said about the Faceless Men, their price for admission is not paid in coin. This section is dedicated entirely to what we do not know. Given how little verified information exists about this Order, that list is considerably longer than the list of confirmed facts. How large is the Order, really? Confirmed canon tells us that the House of Black and White and Braavos exists, and is staffed by an unspecified number of priests and acolytes. Beyond that, it is pure speculation whether the Faceless Men maintain any presence outside of Braavos. Permanent agents embedded elsewhere in the world, as some fan theories suggest, is something that is never confirmed. The text gives us exactly one temple and a handful of named members. How does the face changing actually work? As we covered earlier, this remains genuinely unresolved. Whether it is magic, mundane mastery, or some combination, there is no official confirmation of the mechanism. What lies beneath the House of Black and White, beyond the Hall of Faces? Confirmed canon shows that the temple has depths and passages beyond the areas Arya is shown during her training, including the chamber where poisons are prepared. But it is pure speculation what else those depths might contain. Further archives, further secrets, or further members are left entirely to the reader's imagination. Did the Faceless Men play any role in the doom of Valyria? As we addressed earlier, this is an appealing thematic theory, but it has no supporting textual evidence. It must be filed firmly under speculation. What are the Order's true long-term goals? From a perspective of historical interpretation, everything we are shown suggests an Order primarily concerned with its own theology and internal continuity, rather than any grand political ambition. But because we only ever see the Order through the narrow lens of Arya's partial, incomplete training, it is entirely possible that a wider institutional purpose exists that the story simply never shows us. Are there other Aryas, other outsiders who were trained and successfully became no one? This is never addressed. The text gives no account of any successful, fully assimilated Faceless Man's origin story in detail. Jaqen H'ghar himself, one of the Order's most prominent members on the page, has a personal history that is never explained. Where he came from, how long he has served, or what his life was before the Order remains entirely unstated. What is the true relationship between Valar Morghulis and Valar Dohaeris? Confirmed canon tells us that these are the Order's ritual greeting and response, translated within the text as all men must die and all men must serve. Both phrases are stated to derive from High Valyrian, tying the Order's language directly back to the fallen freehold. Through historical interpretation, the pairing of the two phrases, die and serve, as a matched greeting and response, encapsulates the Order's entire worldview in 4 words, mortality and duty, offered as a single package. Beyond that linguistic and thematic reading, though, the deeper ritual significance of the exchange, whether it functions as a password, an oath, or something more, is not elaborated on. How is the price of a contract actually set, and who decides which contracts are accepted? This is never explained. We are told contracts are expensive, and that a specific, high code of conduct governs which killings the Order will perform. But the internal decision-making process, who reviews a request, what disqualifies a target, how disputes are settled, is entirely absent from the text. The honest answer to most of these questions is, we do not know, and the Order almost certainly wants it that way. An institution built on erasing identity has, whether by design or by nature, also erased most of its own historical record. From a perspective of historical interpretation, why does an Order this obscure, one that occupies in raw page count a relatively small portion of an enormous saga, loom so large in how readers talk about this world? Part of it is craft. The Faceless Men are one of the story's purest embodiments of show, do not tell. We are given fragments, a coin, a changed face, a list recited in the dark, a pool that grants a merciful death, and left to assemble the rest ourselves. That incompleteness is not a gap in the storytelling. It is the storytelling. Part of it is thematic weight. In a saga obsessed with names, titles, and inherited identity, with characters killing and dying over who gets to be called true heir or king, the